Okay, so we might get started. Welcome, everybody. My name's Patrick Pheasant. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of NIS Australia, and I'm very happy to be presenting to you today about ways to improve the student orientation. This is one of our ongoing webinar series. We've been running these every 2 weeks or so, and this is the second last one we'll be running for the year. So thank you for joining us. If you just want to pop your name and say hi in the chat room, it's good to always hear where people are from. Let us know who you are and where you're calling in from, and yeah, we can see who's in the room with us today. This webinar is recorded, and of course you'll be getting 2 CPD points for this webinar. So there'll be instructions sent to you by an email within 48 hours, and it's a really simple process. You just log in to NIS Online and do a short quiz, and then you'll be able to have points allocated to your user account on NIS Online, and then these points are then published against your name on our website. So make sure you look out for that email in the next couple of days. Welcome if you've just joined us. So let's start. I'll just start with an acknowledgement of country. For those of you that aren't from Australia, we do this to show our respect to the Indigenous owners of the land upon which we work. And NIS Australia would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Camaragal, Gadigal and Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose land NIS meets, works, studies and teaches. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and extend our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all nations of this land. So today's outcomes, we're looking at improving the student orientation. And, this has been done traditionally in the past on the first day upon arrival of students arriving in country. But what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is a complete flip of the student orientation. And we've seen some pretty innovative and engaging ways for contacting and connecting with students virtually, and we'll be sharing what some of the NIS endorsed members have been doing to engage students with their orientations. We're going to look at different types of orientation activities. We'll look at some best practice relating to orientations. We'll explore how the student orientation fits into the big picture of the NIS Quality Assurance Framework. And I'm also going to be sharing how some of the ELT providers have changed their orientation activities over the last 12 months. So just to put all of this in context, so NIS has been around for 30 years. We endorse e-English language teaching centres, and more recently in the last 2 years or so, we have started to endorse education agents. And thank you to those education agents who are joining us today. We have also been endorsing service and product organisations. So these are organisations that provide a service to the English language teaching community. They're listed on our website and have undertaken an endorsement process with NIS. And most recently, we've been endorsing ELT professionals, and many of you are joining here today. So if you're a teacher or an academic manager and you would like to be listed as an ELT professional on the NIS website, it's a really simple process. You apply for a listing and you can have a listing for 90 days. And during that 90 days, you have to start to undertake some of our professional development to stay on the listing and stay a listed ELT professional. Welcome to all of you. So I just want to understand a little bit about yourself. So we're going to flash a poll up on the screen. And so what I'd like you to do is when the poll comes up on the screen, if you can please enter 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Enter 1 if you love teaching. Enter 2 if you're more of a student than a teacher. Enter 3 if you've led a few orientations in your life. Enter 4 if you're new to all of this. Enter 5 if you support teachers, and enter 6 if you are an ELT business owner. So we're going to leave this poll open for a little while, and we've got people answering, so that's great. If you haven't yet answered, just go and tap on the poll and throw in a number. Which one of these do you identify most with? Okay, so we have got most of the people answering. Thank you. We're going to end the poll, and I'll share the results with everybody. So we've great. We've got some teachers in the room, people who love teaching. That's excellent. We've got a few people who have been around the block and done a few orientations, so that's good. And we've also got some professional or administrative staff who support teachers. Fantastic. So we've got a nice range of participants in this webinar. Okay, so we're just going to throw into the chat room now. This is a chance for you to just throw one word or two words into the chat. Just when I say the term student orientation, what comes to mind for you? So if you just want to throw into the chat, open up the chat window, and if you just type in a message there. So we've got some people saying class rules. For student orientations. We've got some people talking about introduction to culture. That's fantastic. Interactive forms, people are using those online. That's good to hear. We've got some people putting in there some information about the programs, getting students inducted to the entire program and expectations and outcomes, information about the courses and the activities at the school. Excellent. Information about student support and student information. Someone's mentioned breaking barriers and being inclusive. Someone has put into the chat room housekeeping. Fantastic. Someone's talked about contacting people at the school, giving information on who's who, going on a quest, following a map of the city, an introduction for services and information from the program venue, regulations, requirements, etc. And someone's popped in campus tour. Awesome. So we've got some great ideas in there, and I can see many of you have actually conducted a number of different student orientations. So that's really good. These are the questions I'm going to ask you to consider over the next 60 minutes. So I just want you to choose one of these questions. Number one, what recent orientation activity have you been involved in? Number two, why is student orientation so important? Number three, how can you use orientations to engage students more? And number four, what advice do you have for someone who's never conducted an orientation before? So I'd like you to choose one of these, and throughout the webinar, just keep this question in mind. And if you've got any responses or ideas, just note them down for yourself. You might note it in the chat room, in the Q&A, or you might just write it down on a piece of paper. We're going to come back to these questions at the end, and I would love to hear from some of the participants in the webinar if you want to share your answers to these questions. So there'll be time at the end to share, but just to keep you on track and keep you focused for the next 60 minutes, choose one of these, and this is your question for the webinar that you're going to be thinking about. Okay, so welcome. So student orientation is a really key experience for the student, and I think probably one of the most important experiences. It really sets the tone, it sets the expectation for the student on what their learning experience is going to be like. And of course, it fits into the NIS quality assurance framework. You know, we have at the very center of our framework the student experience, and in that quality area B, which is the student experience, there's a number of different key drivers and key principles that are related to the student orientation. So if you're going to walk away with one piece of information from me from this webinar, it's to go to the NIS website, have a look at the quality assurance framework, and look at Area B. Area B is all about the student experience. Now, we have many other areas in our quality assurance framework. We look at teaching, learning, and assessment. We have guides on strategy, risk, and governance, on resources, facilities, admin management and staffing. And many of you are well aware of the NIS quality assurance framework. It even looks at how you promote and recruit students. And this is also another key area you might want to have a look at if you want to look at more best practice and principles around student orientations. Of course, we also have bolt-on or additional areas. So if you are dealing with welfare for under 18s, if you're dealing with young students, we have advice on that. You can look at that area. If you are looking at doing transnational delivery or already do that, this is one of our new quality assurance areas. You might look at the standards there to give you some ideas. If you're running a foundation program, you might look at our standards. These are new standards that we've written for foundation programs. So check those out. And finally, if you're going to continue to do your student orientation online, which many providers are, I'm sure, you can look at the online delivery standards and make sure you engage students in that way as well. So looking at Area A and just kind of drilling down a little bit into that, Area A has 4 key areas or 4 key principles. The first principle of Area A is looking to make sure the application and enrolment process is clear and easy to follow. And this is for students, for agents, and not just written in a way that the teacher can understand it or that the school can understand it, but written in a way that students can understand it. It's important that students are given information during the orientation about any support that's going to be offered, and specifically not just support and information on dealing with the class and dealing with the learning objectives or outcomes, but also support and information on how to live and study in the country. And the best practice that we've seen in the last 12 months or so is, even though students are not coming to Australia, they haven't been able to, the programs that are engaging the students the most have kept up that information about living and studying in Australia, and have made it really relevant to students, because that's the key reason why students are engaging in our programs, isn't it? They love Australia, they want to come to Australia, they want to experience Australian culture. It's a wonderful part of the international education sector that we have here. So it's been great to see providers keep that up, even though things are being done virtually. And also it's important that students are provided with support so they can be actively involved in their learning programs. So many people think orientation is all just done at the beginning, but orientation is an ongoing process. It starts with the initial engagement point of students. It continues right through to their course start, but also very importantly, the orientation continues after the students have actually started and into the program and into the end of their program. So it's important that students are actively involved at every step of the way. And finally, it's important that stakeholder feedback is embedded in your systems and processes and used to design and redesign and improve your programs for the student experience. So we're going to just spend a minute just to kind of drill down into these 4 areas so you can see the kind of, the support that NIS provides through our quality assurance framework. If you're looking at the application and enrolment process, it's really important to spend time making sure that you've got trained staff, that the admission procedures are implemented by trained people, and if you've got counsellors on board, that they're trained for counselling as well. It's important that government regulations are well understood, they're readily explained by the admission staff to the students, and it's important that provision is made for inquiries and enrolments from a range of channels. So this might be online chats, it might be a help desk, it might be an FAQ list, and it might be, of course, the student handbook. And it's important that there's a regular review mechanism in place. This is to ensure that the admission procedures and related documents are updated in line with changes to any regulatory requirements. So with our quality area or quality principle B2, that's living and studying in Australia, it's important that provisions made for the welfare of students, of course, and this should be relevant to their personal and their cultural backgrounds, and also relevant to where the centre is located. And if you're working in the online space, it's important that student welfare in a virtual environment and netiquette, things like that, are included as part of your orientation programs. It's important that students are provided with an orientation program, of course, that they're well informed about health and safety. They're told where they can seek help if necessary. And, for students who are under 18, it's really important that they're given the, extra attention and duty of care that we have listed in our welfare for under 18s area. And finally, accommodation, of course, is important. And, we've seen accommodation providers begin to ramp up their services now as we have expectations for students to be returning next year. So now it's time to start thinking about, how are you going to re-engage with accommodation providers? Are you going to use homestay? Are you going to use student purpose-built accommodation, or a combination of the two? And make sure that students are well informed about their options. When you're looking at how to get students actively engaged and get involvement from students, it's important that students are made aware of the course objectives, the expectations, the requirements, and learning outcomes. If you're seeking to engage students, it's really important to teach them about engagement so they understand and can recognize when they're actually being engaged and when they have the opportunity to engage. And this is something I think that's, we can do more of in our programs. If we want students to feel engaged, we need to be explicit about teaching how to be engaged. And that can start right at the orientation program. It's important to give different levels of support, make sure that, all students are receiving support regardless of their timetabling. And, this has been a bit hard for many providers in the last 12 months. We've had, people running classes through Zoom using Australian times. And yet, some of the students have had to be calling in really late at night or really early in the morning to participate with those time zones. So it's important that those students are also being given support. And finally, of course, we're in this for immersion. Our ELICOS programs are about being intensive and about encouraging immersion. And it's important to have a great timetabled 20-hour-a-week class, but it's also important to provide opportunities for students to improve their English outside of the classroom. And that can be quite challenging for students who are still in country. And finally, it's important for, I think, providers to include in their orientation programs and their counselling and their advice to students, ideas for what students can do post-graduation. So, our journey, or the student's journey, doesn't just end on the last day of class. We're about providing a lifelong learning approach to English language teaching and English language learning. And I think this is something that needs to be considered in your orientation programs. The fourth area, or the fourth principle, is getting stakeholder feedback. And, this is something NIS specialises in. We have been using a stakeholder-driven feedback model for the last 12 years or so. We get feedback from students, from teachers, and from centres, and we triangulate that feedback. And I think providers, English language centres, can do the same. You can get information from students through surveys. You can also survey teachers, and you can also do your own self-analysis or your own observations of how the centre is running. And you triangulate that data and look for where there's similarities and look for where there's differences. The similarities are your best practice, are your achievements, what you're doing well, but the differences of opinion between students, teachers, and the centre, that's your areas for improvement. So if you're doing surveys, make sure you're triangulating and getting it from different sources. And make sure that you have a system for complaint handling, and that's very obvious and apparent to students. And also, use those complaints as learning opportunities as part of your ongoing quality improvement cycle. So that's a little bit about our framework and about our standards, and you can use these standards to guide you in redesign of your orientation program. But this is something that we hear from our students when we interview them in our focus groups as part of the NIS quality assurance process, as part of the QRVs. We hear some of these pieces of feedback from students really regularly. So we hear from the students don't hear information from agents. They don't get enough information about the program. Agents don't have the right information, or are given different types of information or misinformation from the providers. So it's important that you see your agent as the first impression for students, and that you make sure that your agents, your education agents, are up to date with all of your information, all of your new syllabus, all of your details. It's really important to, see the education agent as a partner. Some students arrive with no information, which, I find astounding. So, but it can happen. So it's good to have mechanisms in place to deal with contingencies. Sometimes students do arrive and they haven't had a chance to complete the online orientation. They've missed out on going to their agent to understand the complete program. So you've got to have a contingency in place. It might be an opportunity for them to catch up online throughout, the first couple of weeks of the program. Many students get a handbook and never read it. And, we put so much effort into the great design of these handbooks and putting all of the information in there. And some providers just give it to the students and don't use it as a learning resource or as a realia or as a practical tool. So, if you've spent that much time designing a great handbook, don't just use it once, use it consistently. It should be considered one of the course texts, and teachers should be trained up on how to use it and use it interestingly and effectively. And, you can continue to engage students about the handbook all the way through the program. Students sometimes read those handbooks and it all just goes straight over their head because the handbook is written, in a too difficult language. So it's important to have the handbook either translated if you've got low-level students, or keep it very simple. Interestingly, most students get all of their information from their friends. So this is a really interesting thing to take on board. You've got the formal information that comes from the centre through the handbook or through the formal orientation activities. You've got some more formal orientation happening with the teachers inside the classrooms, but actually probably about 80% of the information that students take on board is through their friends. So if you've got an opportunity to coach, to mentor, and to influence some of those peer networks through Facebook, through WhatsApp, through some of those other channels, that's the place to get the information, the correct information in circulation. So then, the students, when they share with one another, they can get the right information. One student, I find this really interesting, gave some feedback about eating mostly noodles, and this was, I think, an interesting learning. Students have different eating behaviours, they have different culture, they have different, cuisines, and it's about providing opportunity for those students on campus to, feel comfort and, be able to have their noodles if they want. And, we look for that when we look at the facilities, on campus. And students are often not introduced to their counsellor, who, should be one of the key to go people on site, on campus. That's a bit of feedback there. But students' concerns are changing all the time, aren't they? And they're different before they come, and then they're different after they've come. And this is an interesting data set here that talks to difficulties that students have, looking at their concerns. It's a little bit outdated, it's from 2017, but I don't think things have changed much. I've seen recent surveys and students are still saying the same thing. Before they come, they are concerned about difficulty with the language, financial difficulties, personal safety. These are kind of priority concerns for them. However, once they get here, the concerns change, and their concern shifts to difficulty with finding accommodation, with difficulty with the actual program, and cultural difficulties. So I think it's important that we bear this in mind when we're preparing our orientation activities, to note that students' needs and concerns are going to change. They're going to be different prior to arrival. They're going to be different upon arrival or in the classroom. And then, they're going to continually change throughout the program. So if we provide an orientation program that's varied, diverse, looks at different stages, looks at different opportunities and touch points for the students, then we're going to ensure that we're dealing with the changing concerns that students have in their life cycle and their experience. So the key areas for orientations I've mentioned, we've got pre-arrival, we've got on arrival, and we've got continuing information and support. And pre-arrival includes things like online courses, more formal letters, links to the provider's website, links to external websites, engagement through apps and through other tools, and really flipping the information to making sure that students have access to it prior to beginning their class. Looking at the on arrival information, and in the past 12 months, this hasn't of course been on arrival in Australia, but it's still relevant. It's on starting before the first class, before their first virtual class or face-to-face class. It's important that students are given the opportunity to look at the student handbook. They're given any other information about the program. They might be encouraged to look at some PowerPoint presentations, to do some online courses, to connect with their peers. This could be either as a group or be done individually. They might get an online tour of the online learning space if you're using a learning management system. Some providers I've seen are giving information about online virtual tours of the city that the school is located in. I think that's a really kind of great thing to do as well. We've seen also, providers looking at all sorts of different creative ways of trying to get students immersed in Australian culture, albeit on a virtual environment. And then we're looking at continuing information support, and this includes things like using the handbook throughout the classes, maybe offering interesting hobby or extension lessons for students to do, having weekly check-ins, asking the students what further information they would like rather than just delivering it all. We've seen all sorts of different peer groups and mentor groups and leader groups getting set up, matching with one-to-one, an experienced student being matched with a new student. Seen that been happening online as well. And we've also seen orientation activities being included in assessment items. So as part of your syllabus design and your course design, you might include an ongoing mini test or presentation activity or flipped activity that's using the orientation information and ensuring that students are re-engaging with it at consistent, accessible activities throughout the program. So they're the stages, but what are the risks? What happens if, there's an incomplete student orientation or, there's no opportunity to do an orientation? What do you think the risks are? So I'm going to ask you to pop back into the chat, and if you can, please think about a risk that might occur or might happen if the orientation is incomplete or not done. What do you think a risk is? Just going to ask you to write a couple of words into the chat function. Yeah, so there's risk to people's safety, risk of losing engagement of students. Yep, losing interest in learning, students wasting time attending the wrong times and the wrong days and the wrong classes. Yep. Okay. We've got people also saying, yes, again, losing interest, causing confusion. Okay, so we've got some not receiving essential information from student about contacts, students complaining to agents, and then your centre gets a bad rep. Okay, good. Yeah, and another comment here about the aims of the program, the student learning are suboptimal and you lose the student's trust. Okay, good. Thank you for that. Here's some risks that we believe can happen if there's an incomplete orientation. There's of course the wasted time, as some of you have mentioned in the chat room, and the less fulfilling experience. But there's also some really basic things like lack of nutrition. Like if students are not informed about where they can go to get healthy food and cheaply, and what resources are available for them if they are coming on campus, this can actually just have a really basic core negative effect of having poor nutrition and lack of sleep. There's fear of academic failure that students have. We have some range of mental health issues, and these can include issues that occur online as well. Students can get fatigued, they can get anxious, they can get depressed, and this is heightened in many ways with the online experience as well. Students are very concerned about financial loss. If they are coming to Australia or intending to come in Australia, they're concerned about being exploited at work or by a landlord. You can even have, some risk factors around unplanned pregnancy, sexual disease, and, in the extreme cases, and, we've heard, reports of this in the news. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's devastating that something can happen to a student. They're just unaware about safety on the beach or unaware about, safety, on the street. So it's important to alert students to those in a calm and informative manner. And finally, if the first impression is a really big one, if you don't make that good impression at the very beginning, students will have a negative impression of the whole program. So let's look at what some providers have been doing over the last 12 months or so as people have been doing orientations online. So there's been a great number of ideas around engaging students, and of course it really is about engaging students. And how have providers been doing this with their online programs? Well, as I mentioned, we've seen some really excellent and I think quite innovative programs where very early on teachers are teaching students about engagement and what it actually means to be engaged, how you can recognize it. So that's co-opting the students into their own understanding about engagement, and also ensuring that teachers, by teaching it, actually understand what engagement is as well. So teaching students and teaching teachers how to teach engagement is really important. We've seen some fantastic inquiry-based learning and teaching. People are really, moving away from some of the more traditional forms of teaching English, grammar-based or, kind of form-based instruction, and really focusing on giving students really exciting problems to solve and, using questions and using different styles of inquiry-based teaching to engage students. We've seen some really excellent programs being developed where the focus is on tasks and problem solving, and I've seen some great programs using arts-based teaching, so it's engaging students through music or through visual arts or through drama. Using real life projects. So, if you've got students online and you are, trying to do an orientation online, give them a real life opportunity to, present something online as part of that orientation. These could be powerful learning tools. Rethinking and flipping your orientation. So, I've mentioned some ideas about breaking up the orientation, not just doing it all in one chunk, and, bearing in mind it shouldn't just be done once, it should be, scaffolded and, reaffirmed and retaught in increasingly more complex ways. This is a way to kind of rethink your orientation so you're not front-ending your orientation. Reinvent your needs analysis. Think about ways to do a needs analysis prior to the orientation so you understand who's in the group and what their skill sets are. Flipping it, so producing all of your content and presenting that in a learning management system so students have had a chance to go through it before they actually connect with you if you're doing a Zoom or you've got them on campus. And finally, I can't reinforce enough, we expect our students to be engaged, but we never teach them what that actually means. So I'm all for, making sure this is included in the syllabuses and the teaching design and teacher training. If you want to engage your students, let's talk about engagement as much as we can. Some ideas from online engagement. So many providers have been doing their orientations online over the last 12 months, and to be frank, many probably still will. This has been a great learning experience for providers to understand the benefits of reaching out to students before they actually come to country. And we've seen some fantastic developments with online engagement and online orientations, and I really hope that providers can continue to use those wonderful tools that they've built. So it's about incentivizing online, using cameras on if you can, teaching students about etiquette, and making sure the orientation sessions are focused on behavior in the online space. Looking at opportunity for incidental communication online. It's really important to break up those hours. If you're doing an orientation that's a couple of hours long, break it up with some breakout rooms or some ways to engage the students and get them kind of working together. Slow down, take some time to have a bit of fun. You might show a comic, or you might try and tell a joke, or you might show a short video. Try and make it fun for students, and you'll through laughter and humor get them engaged and connected. As I mentioned, look at some real intentional engagement activities. We've seen some providers do some fantastic virtual excursions, trying to get experience of culture and environments through the online space, and using many of the wonderful websites of tourist attractions. And we've seen some great guest speakers. So during orientations, it's been wonderful to see schools bring in guest speakers. This might be an education agent, it might be a guest speaker, the counsellor, or it might just be another student who's had a bit more experience. So try and break up the presentation with some interesting guest speakers. Important to facilitate some interaction with the students every 3 to 5 minutes, whether that's using the chat room or the Q&A or a poll. Looking at different diverse presentation methods. If you're doing, you can use a virtual whiteboard, or you can use Padlet, or you can switch between different tools online. Some providers are actually letting students come in as guests and attend a session before they actually start. So that's part of the orientation, is to attend an online session of a class that's already in progress. And we've also seen some providers inviting education agents as well. It's good to do some collaborative research and presentations. You might present with multiple teachers and team present for the orientation, or you might actually flip that and get students to present to one another the information about the orientation as well. So there's been some great learnings through online delivery, and I hope we can keep up those learnings when we continue to do our orientation, or at least starting to engage students before they arrive. So now we're starting to think, very excitedly about next year. And, in my recent conversations for preparing this presentation, I spoke to a number of different providers, and I asked them what they're doing about next year and what they're starting to prepare for. And, starting first and foremost, providers' main concern is to be starting to think about how they're going to deal with a safe return to campus. So there's many resources out there. You might start with the resources that the regulators have. There's some information there from TEXA and from ASQA. You'll get a copy of this PowerPoint, by the way, so you'll be able to download these links. There's constant new information being uploaded to the regulator sites, so you can see some great COVID-safe return to campus plans, some templates to use, and you can start to think about how you're going to map out your campus and get it ready for students to return. Put in here some information from a couple of our providers from Sydney Uni and from Australian Pacific College. There's some links there on what they're actually doing to start to engage students and prepare for a COVID-safe campus. So if this is something you haven't done, it's something you can start to think about and prepare for next year. And of course, there's heaps of resources available online to prepare templates for this. I spoke to one provider, and they talked about changing their orientation. So they have no intention to do a big orientation anymore. This is partly to do with having a COVID-safe campus and avoiding large crowds on campus. But it's also because this provider wanted to start using more interactive tools such as videos, PowerPoints, and trying to get a kind of an intimate relationship occurring in small groups with teachers and students. So I think this is an interesting model. We've seen in the past some of the orientations, especially the large providers, when they might have they might have 500 to 1,000 students arriving on campus at one time. Those big events, are being rethought and being looked at, in different ways. So it's something you might start to consider if you, were running big events in the past. Another provider I spoke to talked about how they wanted to make sure students had enough resources to do things online themselves. So, originally they had a list of websites that they were giving students, but, they've really started to make sure that, those virtual tools and applications are very clearly demonstrated to the student. The students have opportunities to practice those tools, and there's help and support for students to use those tools like Zoom, like Padlet, like Microsoft Teams, like Google Chats, all of those tools that the teachers will be using. So part of the training is to train students on the tools. So that's good to see some providers are thinking about that. Another provider I spoke to talked about, having a comprehension quiz and, letting students do that again and again so they get 100% before they start their online classes or their online orientation. They're looking at ways to encourage social interaction with students, and looking, this particular provider was looking at, preparing to offer students coffee and engaging other elements of the campus and the school to support international students and encourage those friendships. Personalized feedback is important to this particular provider, and utilizing the placement tests and the needs analysis to give students some pretty constructive ideas on what their strengths and weaknesses are, and communicating this to the teacher, not just using it as a placement test. Another provider I spoke to talked about having a value survey, so really acknowledging that the student voice, the student opinion is really important to capture from the very beginning. So having a more, qualitative approach to collecting data from students, not just doing a test or a quiz, but actually having lots of open-ended questions to find out what students value, what they think they're going to need, what they want from their experience while studying at college. And using again at the 10-week point or at the end of the course, a student survey again, and looking at how the data is correlated between the two to demonstrate improvements in student satisfaction from the start of the course to the end. Another provider I talked to, they spoke about having individual interviews with students, and now that we can do that quite easily and quickly online, this might be a way to rethink your orientation, even with large groups, is have an opportunity to speak to each student and connect with them and ask them about their future plans. And maybe encouraging also students to connect with each other through breakout rooms and through other social media tools to encourage students to be developing those peer networks. We've seen some great virtual tours being designed and constructed, and that can be done on a very large budget with an interactive 3D virtual space, but it can also be done on a very low budget as well, just with a simple PowerPoint and mapping out some of the resources that are on campus for students to look at and experience. And Provider F wanted to reassess their orientation pack. So really looking at redesigning the handbook, making sure it's simplified, it's easy for students, it's attractive, it's well designed, and it's full of resources, not just about what to do on campus, but also about different social activities, calendar items, ideas for meeting people. So utilizing and rethinking the handbook to make it a little bit glossier and engaging, and something that students want to hold on to, not just a big thick book that they put away after they've been given it. And And just the last provider I spoke to, they are rethinking the way that they're going to start their classes. So rather than having everyone start on the first day, looking at different cohorts, doing staggered starts. This way that they can actually engage with students in smaller groups, and really ensuring that students aren't all kind of in one large group. So I think this is something to consider as well, not just having an orientation day, but staggering the starts for students, so there's opportunity for students to rotate and to experience the campus in smaller groups. So lots of good ideas, and providers are really thinking about returning students next year, and that's fantastic to see that people are really getting excited and prepared about their orientation programs. So I'm just going to quickly talk about the Fair Work Ombudsman. So this is something that is often left out in handbooks, and I think and in orientation sessions. So it's really important that it's included somehow. Students need to know about their rights and need to know about the great resources that the FWO has. So it's, for those of you that don't know, in Australia we have a Fair Work Ombudsman, and this is a government agency, provides lots of education and information about the workplace, and really supports international students if they're unclear about what their rights are in the workplace. So it's important to introduce it and important to talk about it. And there's a whole bunch of tools and resources that you can introduce international students to through the Fair Work Ombudsman. Things like pay and conditions, about how to record hours, about information for young workers. There's all sorts of resources there, so it's a great tool. Please include it if you haven't already. So what can you show students on a local tour? Well, there's all sorts of different ideas here, and we've been seeing that happen online. Students' needs may have changed. Students who are coming to Australia next year, they're going to be really concerned about health and safety. They're going to be concerned about medical issues. They're going to be really concerned about COVID and about safety and practice. So it's important that you start to enthuse all of those into your tour and into your orientation sessions. So not just showing students the usual nearby supermarkets, places to get food, but also showing them about the the medical services that are available, where the chemist is, where the doctors is, helping them out with understanding what the emergency processes are if there's a crisis, or if there's another lockdown or some other event on campus. Really preparing students for being aware of what their resources are for those events. And as we've seen in the last 12 months, those things can happen pretty quickly and pretty rapidly. So it's important that there's a contingency plan in place, and you've considered what your crisis management process is for students if something like that happens. And of course, teachers and admin staff and managers all need to be trained up and need to be communicating those crisis management plans as well. So I'm just going to just quickly, a couple of quick things to remember about a student orientation. It needs to be easily comprehended. It needs to be thorough. It needs to be creative and interesting and engaging. We've talked about ways to do that. Students need to be checked that they have understood and they comprehend everything, and the student orientation needs to be followed up on. So these are kind of summary of the things that we've discussed today. And I just want to jump ahead now to seeing if people have some comments or thoughts about their questions. So just going to now open up to see our participants in the group. So we've got a number of different participants, so welcome. Just might call on one or two participants just to share your impressions about this workshop, and if you've got any kind of new ideas about what you might do with your orientation moving forward. So if we can just call, maybe we call Joe Kwai, would you like to jump in and say hi? If you'd like to join our virtual stage, Joe, and just, yeah, if you've got any thoughts about your orientations, it'd be great to hear from you.
Oh, Joe's on a phone call at the moment.
Okay. How about let's try Lizel Brun. Are you with us? Would you like to jump in and say hi? And yeah, if you've got any great ideas about orientations that you'd like to share.
Perhaps Rebecca, if you're available.
Oh, here we go. Hi there.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for being brave enough to come up on our virtual stage.
I'm just not sure why my camera's not showing anything at the moment, but I do have a camera.
Okay.
I should pop up in a second. Hi, everyone.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, did you have any interesting things to share about orientations with a group?
Well, we started doing a lot of virtual orientations last year, like everybody did. And we're an RTO here. So after our, we didn't really have any new English students starting. We actually, I was given the job to sort of look after the vet students. So my first experience with online orientation was with vet students, but they're international students as well. So I mean, a lot of the things applied that you've already talked about here as well. I think the main thing too was trying to keep things interactive, trying to keep them engaged. And I guess one of the rules that we carried over from our online English teaching into online orientations was that participants had to have their cameras on. We had to be able to see them. We asked them questions. We had to be able to hear them because I think we all know it's very easy to tune out of, of online sessions as well. And we wanted to keep them engaged. I noticed the example before about going to a Padlet site as well. I mean, I love Padlet. I use it a lot for teaching English, but there's a great little Padlet template that is a world map, and you find a place on a map and put an entry there. And so that was a really nice thing to do. I'd say, right, we take 10 minutes, everybody enter your country in on the map or your hometown in on the map, and then write a little bit about yourself on the pin, and then go and read someone else's, and doing that kind of read about someone else and report back about them, that kind of thing, which is kind of nice. Only works with small groups, I guess. It depends. If you've got a lot of people, it's probably a bit different.
Yeah, no, I've seen that as well. That's a great tip, that world map with Padlet. Awesome. Okay, well, thanks for sharing, and thanks for the tips there, and thanks for joining and coming up on the virtual stage. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, so we might move on. So thank you, everyone, and just going to kind of wrap up now the presentation, just to let you know a bit of information about what's happening next year with NIS. So we'll be running another webinar in a couple of weeks, and that will be our last webinar for the year. And then from next year, we will be offering different webinars looking at different communities of practice leading up to our conference in May. So in May, we'll be running a hybrid conference for those that are in Sydney and can come to Dalton House. That's a wonderful experience to come for 2 days and meet with your colleagues and peers, and we've got some great speakers lined up already for the conference. If you are not from Sydney, you can tune in, and we have a fantastic hybrid conference experience where it's not just Zoom. You get to really get a sense of what's happening on site. You can look at the speakers and you can participate and get a real feel for the on-site conference. So we'd love for you to join. There is some quite well discounted tickets available till the end of November. So if you haven't taken advantage of the first release tickets, I recommend that you do. We really want as many people to attend as possible. So there's some pretty heavy discounts there available before the end of this month. For those of you that have been working through our online micro-credentials, thank you. There's a lot of things that you can do on NIS online. We've got our core courses if you're new to teaching or quality assurance. We have our specializations if you want to focus and hear from experts on things like arts-based pedagogy, leadership, research, education agents, the whole 6 specializations that you can do. And of course, we have our Master Practitioner, which is our capstone program. And many of you have started that program, and we've had a number of people who have achieved that capstone. It's certainly a great accolade to have gone through that program. It's a research-based, activity-based program where you get to decide to do something on the job and apply the quality assurance principles to it. And we'd love for you to work through that with our support and achieve that accolade. So check it out on the website if you haven't already. And as I mentioned, there's a certificate in CPD points for all of our webinars. So please check your inbox or your junk box. In the next couple of days, you'll receive an email from us with a link, and then you just do a quick quiz, and you can print out your certificate if you need your certificate for your work, and your points will be allocated and accrued to your CPD total points. The next webinar is planning for professional development in the coming year. It's a great opportunity if you're starting to think about what you're going to do with teachers next year, how you're going to design out your year of PD. It's an opportunity to reflect on this year, what you've done with PD, and start to put into place some key management principles around designing great PD for your teachers for next year. Join me. I'll be running that webinar, and I'd love to have you come back and join me again for another hour in a couple of weeks. So that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. If you'd like to just take this quick survey, we value your feedback as always. We do take the feedback quite seriously. So if you can just take a snapshot of the QR code and do the survey quickly on your phone, or follow the link that Cameron, my colleague, has put into the chat room to complete the survey. We'll leave this open for the next couple of minutes or so. So that's it from me. Thank you for joining us today. I hope this was helpful for you and you've started to think about your orientations, how you might improve your virtual orientations, but also rethink your orientations for next year when we can start to expect our students back on campus. So thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing, and good luck with the rest of the year, and see you hopefully in a couple of weeks in the next PD session. Thank you.